Hey there, guys! Welcome to Robidoux's live stream here today on July 23rd. Today we're going to be talking about a very special member of St. Joseph's history. I'd like to call him a good guy, but he wasn't. Today we are talking about none other than Tom Pendergast. Mr. Pendergast was exactly what it says there. He was a political boss in the era of the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, when almost every city was run by corrupt businessmen and the mob. He was right there with them. Brooks going to tell us a little bit about his history, how he connects to St. Joe, as he was the mob political boss of Kansas City, and a little bit about kind of, how he rose to power and what that power really was. Brooke?
So let's just dive right in. Why is Tom Pendergast related to St. Joe? That's the big question. And the answer is he grew up here. His family lived in St. Joseph along with his 9 other siblings. I know that his mother, his family was of prominent Irish descent, and they settled in the area. He, just to give you some background, was born in 1872. And so this was, what would you say, about 20 years after the founding of the
Yeah, so in that
town?
era of
Yeah.
the rise of
Everything's,
St. Joseph.
yeah, the rise of St. Joe, the golden era of St. Joe. Commerce was booming, political systems were being established, trade was of importance. So basically, there was a little bit of a debate on his schooling. It has been noted in our research that there's been some conflicting views of his schooling. One account was that he went off to boarding school as a child, and another account said that the school he went to didn't exist at that time. So there's some conflicting views on that. If you know about Tom Pendergast, maybe you might shed some light on his early schooling years. But he grew up in St. Joe, and then he, like I said, had several siblings, and one brother happened to live in Kansas City, down in what is called the West Bottoms. If you're familiar with the West Bottoms, was what it is today. There's a lot of commerce activity there now. There's shops and various boutiques. People live down there in a minimal type of capacity. But it's widely used now for shopping and local businesses. But in the 1890s, it was very much an immigrant neighborhood. There was a lot of Irish in the West Bottoms, and it was literally called the West Bottoms because it was at the bottom of the cliffs in Kansas City that overlooked the Missouri River. Just to give you some background, in relation to St. Joe, the Missouri River, we live right next to the Missouri River, and as does the West Bottoms in Kansas City. So Pendergast, he's of age, he's 18, he leaves town, and he goes and he works for his older brother, Big Brother Jim. His big brother Jim owns a tavern, Irish tavern, down in the West Bottoms. So he gets taken under the wing of his older brother and shown the ways of the world of Kansas City. His older brother was an alderman for the Kansas City Council at that time. We're talking 1890s. We're getting into the early 1900s, and he basically shows Tom the ropes, showing him the city's political ways and strategies for controlling the citizens' votes, which would become an overarching theme in his adult life. This is the path that he chose to go down at that time. All these things that he's learning from his big bro became useful to him later on in his actual career. So he's showing him the ropes. So Big Brother retires in 1910 and actually names Tom his successor as alderman for the Kansas City Council. Tom ends up serving in the city council, but he doesn't stay there for very long. And in fact, this is really his only official elected position. He actually steps down in 1916 and focuses on, and I quote, consolidating factions of the Johnson County Democratic Party. So he has some other ideas in mind for what he wants to do with his life. He literally wants to be a political boss, which is hence the title of our slideshow today. During this time, he does meet a lovely lady. He gets married the year after his brother retires and names him alderman. So that's the year he gets married. He ends up having 3 children, and he purchases a home in the country club. Kansas City Ward Parkway is a very rich old area, and so you can actually go to his historic residence today. It's still standing. It's 5650 Ward Parkway. It's a very prominent neighborhood. So he stayed there. That was his house his entire life. But going back to now, he's basically wanting to control voter participation. And in 1925, a new charter was passed placing the Kansas City under the wing of a city manager, which was picked by a smaller council, and Pendergast easily gaining control over who was in that smaller council that picked the city manager. It all tied in together, and whatever he wanted, people would bend at his will. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, so he got involved within the community, and he used whatever he did in the community to his own personal gain and to his own personal political objective. He supported Truman during the 1930s, and this was in some ways to outcry against Catholic prosecution that was happening currently at that time in Mexico. So that was a personal agenda he wanted Truman to address. So he really was able to become a member of the Knights of Columbus, which Truman was part of, to persuade Truman or to get in contact with Truman and have that established connection with him. Pendergast actually ruled from Main Street, and I think we have a picture of that. Yeah, that tiny building to the left-hand side, he was on, I believe, the second floor of that building. It's 1908 Main. And that building is actually standing there today. This is downtown Kansas City. So if you want to go take a selfie, do that. If you've already gone there and taken a selfie, post a picture below this video, and we'd love to see it. So, getting to the heart of this, what exactly did he do? So basically, he was known to secure all manners of favors. He was essentially as corrupt as they came. There were regular shootouts that occurred in this building, driving by this building. There were regular beatings inside of this building. Um, and this was in context, the golden era of jazz was happening. Buildings, the golden era of building buildings in Kansas City was also a thing. So there was a lot of development politically, socially, and economically that was happening in Kansas City. And just to give you some more additional background, St. Joe was established earlier as a city, and Kansas City was the smaller brother at that time. They were lagging behind a little bit in years as far as being established as a city. So when Pendergast actually started living there, there wasn't a lot of civic buildings that you would picture a city naturally having that you go to today. You know, which is part of what he did later on. He, with all of his mafia intimidation ways, he tried to overshadow that a little bit by paying medical bills for individuals, providing jobs, and I say that loosely, hosting Thanksgivings and Christmases for the poor. So he did do a few things in the community to help his image, but ultimately that didn't necessarily, get him into heaven, so to speak.
Well, and a lot of those tactics were specifically designed to guarantee votes.
Oh, really?
There's a lot of evidence that he had almost 100% voter turnout while he was the political boss, because he would basically, if you didn't show up at the gates to vote for his man, his thugs would beat you up. And if you went to one of these dinners, you were basically expected to just tote the party line that was Pendergast's party line. Whether it was the Democratic Party's party line is a different story. What Pendergast wanted, he basically made sure happened.
Wow, 100% turnout,
Yes.
voter participation.
Yes.
That is crazy. Yeah. Well, that is quite the fraud intimidation.
Yes.
Pendergast, just kind of piggybacking off of what Daniel was saying, actually bribed police, and the police allowed alcohol and gambling.
During Prohibition.
Yeah, so this was all during Prohibition, highly illegal, and he was above the law. He actually, bribed the law. He owned the law at this time. And of course, many elections were fixed, as we just going back to what Daniel was saying, to keep him and his friends within these power circles, dominating the city. During this time frame that he was rising to this political boss power out of this two-story building, he invested in a business called Ready Mixed Concrete, which is exactly what it sounds. It's ready mixed concrete. And he bestowed himself government contracts in the amount of 40 million bond programs. So while that was all fine and dandy, the city with these bond programs were actually went to a good use. The city was being still constructed at that time, and so a lot of the concrete that was used from his business went into a lot of the civic buildings that still stand today, which is actually kind of cool, even though he was who he was. I know that the courthouse was built using his concrete. The Power and Light building has his concrete, Fidelity Bank down there, the municipal auditorium, and then several of the inner city high schools in the downtown area, along with a few others. But we wanted to mention, I think, an urban legend.
Yes,
Is that
so
right?
there is an urban legend about him.
Okay.
That his political enemies are buried under one of the streets that he built. Now, unfortunately, that's not a true statement.
Allegedly.
In the 1980s, they did tear up that street that the urban legend was about.
One street.
And didn't find any bodies, but doesn't mean they don't still exist.
So, just because they tore up one street doesn't mean that there aren't bodies in the concrete of the courthouse.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
Right.
Today, we wanted to cover a little bit about the beginning phase of Mr. Pendergast's life. He has a very fascinating story.
Fascinating.
So we're going to tell you the second half next week of his decline.
There is more?
His fall, and his connection to Harry Truman that is a little closer than you would expect. Harry Truman probably wasn't as nice and clean as people like to think he was.
Oh, that's too bad.
So come back next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about Mr. Pendergast. If you want to try and get some hints about him before that, come in and see us. You might be able to squeeze a little information out of us before.
Should we have a question of the day? If you answer correctly, you win.
Let's save that for next week.
Okay.
There's some more interesting stories next week. I think that'll have a great question of the day. But definitely come see us here at the Row. And come back next week to learn a little bit more about Mr. Tom Pendergast. Thanks for joining us today. Bye.